project. So really our goal when we were starting this project was to connect historic sites, really telling the African-American experience in Kansas City. We did pick a website-based one as opposed to a physical trail, and there were many reasons we did this. This being one of them. Kansas City, of course, is at least within the city limits, has almost 319 square miles. I kind of highlighted this on an annexation map. You see the core of the city from 1853 to 1897, and that's really where a lot of our concentration of African-American historic sites are at. But then we had some basically relatively decent sized annexations through World War II, but we also had some really large annexations in the 1950s and 60s. These areas, some are developed, some aren't, but they were mostly rural in nature. And the one thing we actually have out there were smaller African-American settlements that we're trying to document even in these further out areas. And as we'll take up when I go a little further into the discussion, and what we did is there were obviously, Missouri being a slave state, there were plantations, and there are some of those houses and places still in existence. So the approach we took really was to basically apply for a certified local government grant. This basically allowed us to, and it's basically a matching grant, allowed us to hire somebody to create the web design. We didn't really at least have somebody on staff that had the time to do it, to really create a design that we thought would promote the trail. We wanted to allocate some money for research services, basically for photographs, written text, etc. And then also we wanted to do a print a brochure promoting the trail, mostly to promote the website in particular.
Hang on, Brad, just 1 second. I think we're missing your
Is my presentation not up?
presentation.
Nope, not a problem. Let me go check on the sharing again.
I was gonna say, I'm sitting here clicking all my settings to make sure, and it might be something on my end that I'm not aware of. There we go.
Is it back again? Okay. Are we in good shape?
We get a comment or two. Anybody? We got. Make sure we know that we're up and live going with that. Yep, we're good. All right.
Okay.
Sorry. Continue.
Thank you. Nope, thank you for telling me. I know. So, as I said the grant was through the Certified Local Government Grant, and that's available through the State Historic Preservation Office, which is distributed through the National Park Service. So really the idea is, I said we wanted to provide these extra services, but most of it was in-kind staff time really to hold the meetings, and then actually to lay out the sites on the website once we had the design created. So we started, excuse me. So we started with our first meeting in December of 2018. Actually, we were actually relatively impressed. It was actually almost about 1 or 2 degrees outside, but we actually had really good attendance, which was wonderful. Really, as part of this, we initially had the idea that we would be linking a lot of existing historic sites that are well known, potentially National Register sites on our local Kansas City Register, and some of just the ones that are well known. But as you can see from our turnout, a lot of people were interested in this. We had people from neighboring towns and cities really wanting to maybe in the future look at more of a metropolitan-wide heritage trail, that could obviously, being so close to the Kansas state line, we do have a very interrelated history here. And just because we cross the boundary doesn't mean the history stops. So another thing we also was important, the main person leading this project was our city planning and development director. The reason Jeff Williams wanted to lead this in particular was to show the importance of this project to the city. Even though as a city preservation officer, obviously I love doing this type of work. We wanted to relay the importance this is to the city by having a city official really kind of lead that at least the initial part of the presentation. A couple of things we learned out of this first meeting is they wanted it to be authentic, and that was kind of an interesting term. One of the things that came out, we didn't want something just glorifying the good things. They wanted to tell the whole African-American experience, including some of the less savory and basically items that are not looked on well now. So including slavery, Jim Crow laws, and even lynchings that happened in the areas. So really we wanted to interpret that whole African-American experience. Also, one of the challenges we had, a lot of these sites are located in areas that are economically distressed. A lot of them are no longer around. The virtual format allowed us to interpret even sites that were no longer there. And I can show you some of those as we kind of explore the website. Really, that allowed us people to visit the site and at least visually see what was there, even though it's no longer there, maybe through a mobile phone or a tablet. So that was also important as part of this. So when we talk about authenticity, basically one of the challenges we have when planning out one of these sites is we obviously have great passion for these projects, but one of the things that in particular with this project, it couldn't really be city-led. We really wanted the community to tell us what they wanted this project to be, and that became very apparent when I first started this meeting. I did not grow up in Kansas City, even though I'm from Southwest Missouri, obviously from the Springfield area. It's a very different urban experience than Kansas City. And our department director actually is from New York, so he didn't actually have the same experience that African Americans in Kansas City had. So we quickly wanted to basically make sure that this was coming from the community and not just led by the city itself. We didn't want to necessarily direct it. We wanted to make it an organic discussion that really acknowledged the hard truth of the African American experience and make an environment where people could talk about that. And then we wanted to say, how do you engage people when you're not a member of that community? Really, who is community? It's not just stakeholders that have an interest in this, whether it's historians, preservationists, but general members of the community that recognize the importance of their history. We wanted organizations such as museums and other organizations related to the African American heritage also to be part of our partners. So community can mean a lot of different things. It's not just people that necessarily live in the community, but people that experience and interpret that community. And quickly, as I kind of mentioned before, I did not come from Kansas City, and I wasn't going to assume anything. That's why we really wanted to change the leadership role. Instead of leading this, we wanted to facilitate a conversation about what this trail would be. We wanted to be open, basically to all ideas, and unbiased and open-minded. You know, and even though I've lived here 20 years, obviously I said I did not. There's people that know the experience of the African American community much better than me. I really respect all the effort they put into identifying these sites and really even opening my eyes to new histories. As I said, when we come a little farther on, the number of sites suggested really kind of overwhelmed us. And we're still working on getting more of them up. So that really tells you the interest in this project. And the other thing we thought was important, obviously I've worked in preservation for a number of years, and there's certain basic criteria I can help out with, but I am not a subject matter expert in the African American experience in Kansas City. There's a lot of people that dedicate their lives to documenting the African American experience. One thing in Kansas City in particular, I mean, many of the historically African American churches are great gatekeepers of history. They provided a lot of assistance in at a minimum, just helping document their history as a church and an organization. But really the idea is basically to step back and just start listening to what people want, what's important to their history, and how we can help out and make that, to document that history and bring it forth. So as we got a little further in, we actually were really blessed by a number of organizations coming up and partnering with us. And some of it partnership was financial. Obviously, the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service gave us the grant. A lot of it was just access to resources like the Black Archives in Mid-America, Mutual Musicians Foundation, the Kansas City Public Library. In particular, they allowed us use of all their basically digital research on the site that we could basically add to various site histories. Negro Leagues, Historic Kansas City, of course, our local preservation organization provided a lot of input and help. UMKC, basically their archives, their Center for Neighborhoods, and their history department provided a lot of help throughout the process also. We had a number of organizations which I think helped out a lot in giving us great content and also really giving us kind of authentic feel to our website. So really we decided to really create, as we had participants come forward, create roundtables. Basically, myself and other planners, basically we sat in these groups and we basically just took notes. We asked community leaders really to lead the discussions. We had educators, people from local museums that had projects. We basically wanted people from the community to lead the discussions in these small groups to make them basically organic, and we would basically take notes and then basically add to the site. So really, I said, as city staff, we really tried to step back and just facilitate how these would go forward, and not necessarily take a leading role and let it come from the community. And these are some of the topics we looked at: oral histories, authenticity, the arts, first trails on the site. Kind of back before, we did talk about physical markers and trailheads, how that we might be able to partner with people in the future to do a next step and start some physical documentation, whether it's markers, plaques for various sites on the trail. Really define, who we can partner with. The education community was very interesting, and I'll kind of get to that a little bit later. This pandemic actually showed how important the site was to our local education organizations. But just to give you an idea, we actually had almost 162 individuals from organizations come to our various meetings. We had about 4 public meetings and then a launch meeting that assisted us and gave us input on the site. And as of today, we had about 241 suggestions for sites and significant people. I'll tell you right now, we have only a little over 100 actually written and up on the site. One of the challenges coming from the public, we wanted to actually document them. Sometimes we just get a name, not necessarily a full history. That's why we're kind of relying on some of our partners as we can to help us write those histories and provide documentation of why they are important, so we can post that to the site. So city staff, we obviously try to post everything that was already listed on the National Register of Historic Places and our local registers. That's relatively well documented, but a lot of the less documented sites, we're all trying to get people to step up and help us write those, even though staff also writes those as we can. So it took us about a year to get to this point. And this is basically the main page of the African American Heritage Trail. We actually registered basically aahtKC.com and .org. We ended up using the org as the main site in the end. Let me go ahead and switch over to that. Hope everybody can see that okay. So this was our final product.
We lost it. You had
what?
it, you took it down.
Did it come back down? Is it working again?
Yeah, it's still not.
There it goes.
Screen share.
Okay. So this was the final site. Just a few technical. We actually, initially we thought we might be hosting it on the city's website. We ended up deciding to use Squarespace. Basically, that Black Archives of Mid-America agreed to host that. We pay the annual fee, which is actually not very much for a nonprofit. So it serves as the basis for the site. Blue Symphony was the web designer that helped us put together the web design. They gave us the templates to make these pages. So this is our introductory page. And the nice thing about this particular site, it's also mobile friendly. We did actually look at trying to create an application. Those are extremely expensive. And maybe it's something we think of in the future. The nice thing about being web-based, it works with Android, Apple phone, and Apple-based phones, and also general web browsers on your computers. So it does have a certain amount of flexibility at a relatively low cost. And it just reformats it when you look at it on your phone. So you might try that sometime. But we've divided it into just some main sections, obviously highlighting the site. So we actually would jump to a list of sites. We have a mapping function, and that is something we kept in the city. If you're familiar with mapping, the mapping company Esri, basically has an ArcMap application. We use the storybook map method, and I'll show you that in a minute for the mapping function. Share allows people to basically share their ideas about future sites. We also have another function in there for oral histories, which we haven't used a lot. And the other thing, which actually we found useful, had a built-in events basically into Squarespace, so we can actually promote events from various partner organizations as part of this. So those are really the four main sections of the website that were created. Sheila Vimmer was our planner here when we were working on this and really helped lay this out. She actually found this great quote from Buck O'Neill. He was a baseball player in the Negro Leagues and really was a champion of the Monarchs in particular, a champion of preserving that history and making sure it was known. It was a great a great quote. Learn your history, it's wonderful history. So many wonderful things have happened in the last 100 years. We have come so far. We still have a ways to go, but that's your job, and you and your children and their children will get there, and I know it. Which I think really speaks to the goal of what we were doing here. Learn from history, relay it to you and your children, and move forward. So we also created the hashtag, and then we also have an Instagram account related to the Heritage Trail. And then we do list our partners also. We do have we can send out basically email for news and updates, which you can sign up for. This is through the city's email system. So that kind of takes us through the main part of the site. So there's a couple of different ways to explore it. First, we decided to create a sites page. This is basically where people can go through and just kind of scroll through the sites. We have a search button. So you can pick various sites. We also decided not just physical buildings, but also people. So sometimes people are looking for significant people, and under those you might have sites they're related to. So let me just take you to the 18th of Vine. If you're not familiar with that, this is kind of our historic, basically commercial and cultural center of African American history in Kansas City. Historically, we, even though we didn't have specific ordinance that limited African Americans in the city, basically covenants and deed restrictions limited them to a relatively small area in Kansas City, from 9th to 27th, from Truce to Prospect. Even though there were other enclaves throughout the city, and you can see some of those interpreted on here. It's actually quite an interesting history. But 18th and Vine is really kind of recognized as the cultural center. So basically, as you can see, we have not too long of a write-up. We wanted to actually give people the ability to do works cited. One of the comments we had, people wanted references. So if they really wanted to delve deeper into the history, they could have some other places to go to and look for additional information. Also, another thing we wanted to do, basically we wanted to recognize people that gave us input. We were really fortunate that Dr. Sandra Enrique, her urban history class, she gave us part of their assignments for the year to write entries for the trail. So Zane Green wrote this particular entry, which we're real grateful for. And then other functions, there's two other items that we were kind of mentioning earlier, a National Register listing. So if it's actually already listed, we want people to be able to actually go to that. So in this case, this links to the SHPA website, so you can actually look at the National Register nomination. And then we have our local Kansas City Register, which you can also actually look at that nomination. So if people wanted to get further into the history and read the nominations, they can actually do that on the website. And then at the bottom of every page, we have usually a variety of pictures that people can look through, just kind of highlighting the history of the area. Some are taken by staff, some are basically historic aerials that we have with the city. So it kind of varies where they came from. And then some of the districts, we actually allowed other sites within the district to be listed if you wanted more information on the individual site. So that's kind of a general example of a district site. I wanted to jump over to the mapping function. So if you click on the map, so this is our ArcGIS mapping system. So you can see here's the 18th and Vine Historic District. So we were able to basically create numbers and points for the sites on the trail. And then with a small write-up, so you can either explore the trail through the map or through the sites page. And I'll kind of zoom out here to kind of give you an idea. So those various lines you see highlighted in blue, those are actually our national and local register listings in Kansas City. We just wanted to highlight those. It's actually all of them. So as you can see, this is from our initial little over 100. You can see how spread out even these sites are. And this is not even the entire city. We have basically White Oak Chapel and the White Oak community up north, which we've documented. But Swope Park had a number of significant African American historic sites. This is a site that most people wouldn't think of. Fairyland Park, which was an amusement park in Kansas City. Basically, it was segregated. It did allow one day for African Americans to come in, but it kind of illustrated basically the Jim Crow laws of the time. It's no longer there, but the community thought it was important to document it and show that it was there at one time. The Leeds Dunbar neighborhood, which was actually a neighborhood on the east side of Kansas City, close to the Leeds industrial area, but is also somewhat of an escape in an African American community that was really outside the main African American community surrounded by the 18th and Vine district. So you can see, and this is just our initial, I said this is less than half of the suggested sites. You can see how spread out they are now. So this was one of the challenges. So we're hoping once we get further into the project and maybe get through all that list and document it, we might be able to do themed walks, whether it's jazz, certain types of history, significant people, or just a neighborhood walk that can be pre-planned. But really right now we're focusing on just documenting the sites and the location. And just to give you an example of some of the other harder conversations, this is the Levi Harrington Memorial. This was actually installed by the Equal Justice Initiative. It's a local and actually even a national initiative to document lynchings in the U.S. But they installed this actually at the same time we were working on the site, so we were able to add this to the trail. And so you can kind of see as we flip back over to the site, its location, basically documentation of it. This is another one from Dr. Enrique's class, and pictures. So this is one of those histories that is important to document, but I said, but a hard history to interpret also. And then another function of the site, and we're hoping to do this more with this as we move along. Obviously, we have emails and site suggestions for adding additional sites, or emailing the suggestions for the sites. But one thing which we're hoping to expand on here in the near future, if everybody's familiar with the StoryCorps, this is a joint project between National Public Radio and National Archives to basically document oral histories. The nice thing about it, you actually can create your own little subgroup for people to submit histories related to a certain topic. So we did create the page. We're hoping in the near future to start a oral history project, to start posting some oral histories on this, and hopefully encourage people as they visit sites to actually post their own. Anybody can do it. You just basically record your site, it's submitted to us, we'll review it before we post it to the site, and make sure it's related to the history of the site. But as I said, this is a no-cost option to document oral history. So we're hoping to use this more in the near future. One of the last components I wanted to show you was the events site. So most of these have passed now. We actually had quite a few in and around African American History Month. And in particular this year, we had the advantage of there were a lot of virtual events, but this allows people to submit events basically related to the African American experience. So in this case, we had even some statewide and national events that we wanted to highlight. But this allows people to promote the interpretation of African American history, and so we try to periodically, we like people to submit them to us, but there are a few places that kind of continuously do these, so I actually go and check websites for events and try to post them as I can. And just to go back here, I wanted to highlight a few different sites just to give you an idea of the variety that were submitted and some of the challenges we had documenting it. So Tom Bass is actually relatively well known. Basically, he basically created an inventive bit. He was really known for his horsemanship, and he lived and had a livery here in Kansas City. One thing I found interesting, I actually found a lot of information from the State Historical Society of Missouri, but we really didn't actually have a good location to associate with him. So one thing we were able to do was actually, with a little extra research, look in our city directories, documents where he lived and where his livery was at. So this is kind of some of the original documentation. This is actually, it was located on Main Street, is what we found out was one of his liveries when he lived here, and he lived over in Westport, which was one of the neighborhoods, in particular Steptoe neighborhood, that was related to a small African American enclave in Kansas City. So So sometimes when we were getting suggestions to interpret people, one of the things we wanted to do was associate a site with them. So staff, sometimes we try to do additional research really to document where they lived, and maybe what was a significant site. And another interesting thing, this is something Lauren Manning worked on, if you're familiar with the Green Book. This was a tourist book that African Americans could use from 1936 to 66 for places to go that were friendly to the African Americans. She's been going through, there's a lot of interest lately, but basically highlighting the sites that were part of that, the Green Book in Kansas City through various editions. So this is something that's just informational, but I think very useful. As I said, we've done recent history or older history, such as Hell's Half Acre here, and this was a site, an African American enclave back when the Hannibal Bridge was being built in Kansas City, and many of them were workers. It's relatively close to it. And then even more recent history related to the civil rights movement. This was Holy Name Catholic Church. This was actually an important part of the riots right after the assassination of Martin Luther King and the riots that happened in Kansas City during that time. We have sites related to the arts. Municipal Auditorium, this was the site that Martin Luther King spoke at when he was in Kansas City. Lincoln Electric Park. Basically, this was a short-lived amusement park for African Americans right next to the 18th and Vine District. As I said, there's a variety of sites from sports to arts. One of our other great benefits in Kansas City, and I wanted to highlight this, let's see. Basically, a local nonprofit organization called the Local Investment Commission. Basically, they are a nonprofit that promotes development, but also they do every year they do a poster and history series on African Americans in Kansas City. They partner with the library to write these up. So they allowed us to use all these biographies of these important African Americans in Kansas City that we're able to post to the site. But we still actually had, in many cases, had to actually link us an actual physical site to the person in the history and the biography that was written up. So really we wanted to take all these histories and hopefully create a space that people could document these experiences, hopefully relate them to a physical site, even if it's no longer in existence. Really to promote the history, what's there, what's been lost, and hopefully encourage preservation in the near future. I think as staff, we were really hoping that maybe as we do more of these, we could look at thematic nominations and formal National Register listing for some of these areas that don't have that formal listing yet, and maybe even a citywide what we call multiple property nomination for African American historic sites in Kansas City, really to encourage the preservation. But as I said, the nice thing about this, since we don't have a formal survey of every site in Kansas City, this allows people to submit them and really creates a great starting point, hopefully for further formal recognition of these historic sites throughout Kansas City. And one last thing I wanted to highlight. Switch back to the presentation. One thing nice about Squarespace, it actually highlights the traffic to your site. So 2020 was really the first full year the site was in use. We had about 8,700 visits. Obviously, we had a very big peak in February. We had about a little over 1,200 people visit the site. But But it's interesting, and this is kind of reflective of the pandemic. So in 2021, basically, with a lot of students and teachers needing to create virtual learning options, basically instead of 1,200 for African American History Month, we had about 5,800 use our site, which kind of really shows the importance of the virtual learning experience. And this is what we're really hoping, and maybe partnering with our local school districts, really to create lesson plans and activities that students can use the site for in the future. So with that, I wanted to thank you and kind of open it to questions from the audience.
All right, I see we have one here from Jill Sullivan. She says, could you speak more about how you were able to partner with StoryCorps?
Really, it's not a formal partnership. StoryCorps, they basically have this functionality built into their website. So really, you just go online and create an account, and you can create this subgroup underneath it. It's really actually relatively easy. That was the nice thing about it. I said the one thing which we haven't done is really kind of get those oral histories really started. So we were actually, I'm hoping to work with Missouri Humanities Council and to create a little oral history project that we can post to the site and to StoryCorps, get somebody to actually go out and do those and take the time. And hopefully that'll basically hopefully encourage people in the future to do some more.
All right. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. If you have one, go ahead and stick it in the Q&A box. And if not, I am in the, oh, Jill has another question. All right, let me have it, Jill. What is it? As she types it. How did you handle the areas that you could not find formal documentation of? For example, oh, that's for example.
I know what you're talking about in general. Yeah. Sometimes the documentation, and I'll tell you the reason probably a lot of these first 100 sites are on there was the number, because we actually had some documentation to go with it, made them relatively easy to post. Even though I think some of the histories of these sites, we only had survey forms, which were relatively small amount of history, but it gave us a starting point, and hopefully highlighting those we can get more history. But I'll tell you, sometimes it's really hard to find a site related to a person. For example, Hell's Half Acre would be a good example. The only reason we know that area was generally where it was located at was we found actually a reference to a pastor in a church down there related to the African Americans in the city directories. But that was about it. There wasn't a lot of other formal documentation besides some notations and some history books, etc. But it was really hard to find physical maps. So yeah, I think there is, it can be a little challenging sometimes, basically with the oral histories and sometimes anecdotal. Luckily, I haven't had to work with that too much yet, just because we have a lot of sites and a lot of good information to get through first. I think sooner or later, though, you're right, it could potentially become a challenge as it matures and grows. So.
From Amanda Clark in St. Louis, can you speak more to solving the challenge of interpretation when not being from an area, not being part of a community, etc.?
Yeah, I think that is always a challenge. I said, I find that no matter what community you're in, usually the local people basically know a lot of the history. Of course, on the flip side, for people that have basically written histories and worked in history and have that background of wanting basically the formal documentation of what's been going on, it is a balance. I think what we're really looking for is, can people tell us what was important and significant to their history? And then as staff, we tried, or working with other people, tried to supplement that with the basically formal documentation, other things you'd expect for a historic site. So that's kind of how we facilitated and helped out in that sense. But they actually kind of said, this is an important, or this person or this event was a really important part of our history. And that's kind of where we started at, so.
Let's see, I'm trying to pick through which ones have like the best content that you can give back that'll help everyone. Someone is interested in the educational benefits and program pieces of the site. Do you follow curriculum guidelines to develop projects for schools?
We have not done that yet. And I said that would definitely be one of our next ones. We really wanted to create a formal curriculum. Basically get with a few teachers or a work group basically to, basically create those sample lesson plans, et cetera, that would hopefully supplement Missouri's curriculum requirements and basically post them to the site. So yeah, that is one of our goals. I said the fact that we had such a increase in traffic was just, I think, due to the pandemic and teachers needing some virtual options. I think they created their own lesson plans based on the site, but I would like to get something that we can distribute, yes.
Awesome. Someone wants to know, Jason Stratman, was it difficult to narrow down the list of sites when everyone had input on that to be included?
Not yet. As I said, being a large city, there's actually a lot of sites. So I said our biggest challenge right now is documenting the sites. What we've been putting up is something we have history on, more than just a name. So our biggest challenge right now is just getting the suggestions and getting some background information we think is in good enough shape to actually post to the site. Basically the why it's important and how do they contribute to the community. As I said, later on as the site matures, I said we still have we had 241 suggestions and we only have a little over 100 posted. So I think as we go down through them, I think there'll probably be some sites that we're going to end up having trouble documenting. And my initial thought on those, we'll probably just hold off on posting those. We'll probably try to basically ask the public to give us that information if we can't find it easily. Really basically say, you wanted to include this site, we need to know more. So I think that's probably where we'll get to that. So
a good volunteer opportunity for folks to fill in those. It is.
So speaking of that, I saw that, yeah, volunteers are paid staff. So it would be both. So we did have volunteers. Basically, obviously, as city staff, we have developed some of our own write-ups and posted them. Obviously, we have a lot of other job duties, so we can't do as much as we would love to do. It'd be fun to work on this full time. But we do rely on the community really to submit sites. There are even sites, especially with some of the churches, that they have actually contacted us, and luckily they have a nice history that we can put together and post to the site. So we've had individuals submit those with the full write-ups and documentation. So we rely on both at this point. So if people want to take on a site or have a suggestion for the site to fill out, we're actually happy to work with them on that. So.
Right. And how did you reach out to the community for a participation group, and how did you select the individuals to lead those discussions? That's a good one.
So basically initially we basically just held that first public meeting. We reached out, obviously we can publicize various ways that we normally do through the city, press releases to the community. We did basically ask organizations that we knew were associated with African American history, like 18th and Vine groups, Mutual Musician Foundation, the Arcgis, etc. To directly invite them. And then just, but we actually said we had a lot of people that basically that just showed up, that individuals from the community. So after that, when we kind of decided on breaking it up into groups and making topics to discuss, we tried to get people really that basically had some type of expertise in that topic. So Black Archives, luckily they had a board member that was relatively diverse. So we had somebody that was an educator that agreed to kind of sit in and lead the education group. We had the head of the Kansas City Museum kind of lead our trailhead and marker group, because she was interested in basically potentially creating a kiosk for the African American Heritage Trail in the museum. So she could help out with that. And sometimes we just had just leaders in the community. We had somebody from Link come who was contributed basically the histories of the that they create every year, but also sat in a group and helped lead a discussion. So yeah, we just asked around. Luckily, I'm in the long range planning department, so we do a lot of community plans. I asked my fellow planners if they had suggestions too of community leaders that they think might want to lead the discussion. So so it was a combination of people that showed up at the meeting, and then basically people that might have expertise in our subject matter that we had the discussion groups from.
All right, let's see. Do you require outside submissions to have sources listed, such as documents, etc.?
We do not. So that is something we try to encourage as much as possible. I think it's helpful, especially for the people that really want to delve into history, to have that there. I said, luckily partnering with UMKC and the students there, Dr. Enriquez were requiring her students to do that. So it allowed us to include that. But sometimes when you have, for example, some of the church histories, basically those were written by the church. So a lot of that was their internal records, which we didn't require to be documented. But we allowed them to submit that. So it varied a little bit by site.
I will send out the website link to all of you when this is done. Also, someone wants to know if there is a connection to the Bicentennial, since there's lots of stuff going on this year with that.
Actually, no, we haven't done anything specifically with the Bicentennial yet. I think that's a great idea. I guess we just have to decide what that would be. So.
All right, well, that looks like all of our questions have been answered. Thank you so much, Brad, for agreeing to speak on this for us today. I have recorded this presentation and it will be available. Brad, I don't know if you want to go ahead and share your contact information. Was it on your slide? I didn't remember.
It was.
Okay.
So
a few folks have asked for that.
So that is my email. It's probably the easiest way. So.
And I will also add that in a follow-up email to everyone here, as well as a link to the recorded presentation. Just want to say thank you for coming. We will have another webinar on May 6th. We're partnering with Post Art Library in Joplin for House Story, How to Research Historic Sites and Structures program. So we're pretty excited about that. So look out for your email on that one. And we encourage you guys, if you are not members already, to join the Missouri Alliance for Historic Preservation and help us continue to offer educational opportunities like this, and also just help the folks that call us every day with questions on how to preserve Missouri's historic resources. So without further ado, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your week.
Thank you. Appreciate it.